So, how do we feel about that midterm? We've graded 4 problems out of 6, so we still have to do grading. Yeah. I would like to talk, before we move on, which we have to move on given that we missed a lecture. We may have to make up this lecture, I'm not sure. Let's see how we do. But before we move on, I'd like to talk for a moment about the midterm. Just a few things. So I still want you to work some of these problems in the midterm. So let's see. I'm going to talk very briefly about some of these problems to give you an idea. And if you didn't do it in the midterm, I would still like you to go over these problems and find out an answer. So problem 1, T of n there are 2 loose bounds to prove for this. I think the lower bound was n cubed, and the upper bound was like square 2 to the n. So the easiest way to prove those bounds, so there were loose bounds, but the limits ones, right? So one thing was to say T of n is definitely bigger than or smaller than, say, so smaller than, this is a small o, what was it? Square 2 to the n. And it's bigger than n cubed. So what this is saying, it's saying n cubed divided by T of n, the limit of this has to go to 0, or equivalently T of n divided by n cubed has to go to infinity. So this is not the bigger or equal than, it's strictly bigger, right? And the other one was saying T of n divided by square root 2 of n has to go to 0, equivalently square 2 of n divided by T of n has to go to plus infinity. Now some of you prove the bigger or equal than bounds. So instead of small omega, some of you prove the big omega, which is not as good, because it's one thing to say it's n cubed or higher, and another thing is to say it's definitely higher than n cubed. This is saying definitely higher. In other words, the asymptote of those two things is not the same. T of n is a bigger function. If I have the big gamma, bigger omega here, it says not as definitely bigger. It says it's either n cubed or bigger. Same thing in here. This is a strict bound, meaning T of n is definitely smaller than square root 2 of n. It's not square root 2 of n or smaller, which would be the big O. Saying it's definitely smaller than this. So the easiest way to prove this, I'm not going to make the proofs, but I'm going to give you 2 ideas for how to do it. One idea is to say an induction sort of statement. Some of you attempted an induction statement, but from what I've seen, I didn't grade this problem, one of the TAs did. The induction statement was incorrect. The induction correct statement for one of these things would be to say, if n minus 1 cubed divided by T of n is, say, smaller than 1 over some quantity, t of n minus 1. Then n cubed divided by t of n is smaller than 1 over c plus epsilon, for example. I'm very generic about those quantities for now. What I'm saying is, if I want to prove this limit goes to 0, I'm going to say that if 0 means, these are all positive quantities, right? So to prove that something goes to 0, essentially we have to prove that it gets smaller and smaller and smaller until it reaches 0, right? There's no negative numbers here. So what this is saying, if this is smaller than something, the next version of the same thing, right? That's where the induction happens, right? From n minus 1, I go to n. It's smaller than something even smaller than that. So if I move n from, say, 20 to 21, I get it to be smaller than this. What's going to happen to the next round? N plus 1 cubed over t of n plus 1 will be smaller than c plus 2 epsilon, right? Well, epsilon and c are generic quantities that need to be figured out. The point is, where is this going to go? This 1 over c plus 2 epsilon, 1 over c plus 2 epsilon. Every time I move n to n plus 1, this denominator gets a little epsilon, right? So where is this quantity going to go eventually? Is this going to go to infinity, the denominator here? Right? Because every time I move n to plus 1, there is another epsilon. And as I keep going and going and going, there'll be c plus k epsilon, right? Which means the denominator is going to go to 0. Now this being a positive thing, smaller than something that goes to 0, has to have the limit equal 0. Who's following me? Okay. So that's an idea. Now you will have to figure out whether c or epsilon are constants or something that depends on n, right? But this is an induction step that we would like to prove. It's saying if this fraction is smaller than something, then the next fraction is smaller than something even smaller that eventually goes to 0. So in fact, what we are proving here is that here's our t of n divided by, n cubed divided by t of n, our limit. We are bounded by some upper function, 1 over c plus epsilon, that we going to show this is 1 over c, right? Plus k epsilon, or n epsilon. If this goes to 0, and this function is constantly under it, it's also going to go to 0. So you have to formulate a similar argument for this one, right? If this is bigger than something, because we want to show that this ratio goes to infinity. If this is bigger than something, then the next version of it, which is square root 2 at power n plus 1, divided by t of n plus 1, will be bigger than something even bigger. So that, I think, is a slightly harder version to prove it. The other option that I think was easier was to prove what you guys did. The loose bounds, but not for these bounds. So here's a trick that it's a purely creative thing, but once you know it, quite useful for doing these kind of things. It's going to seem obvious once I said it. How about I prove the loose bounds, but not for those bounds? So instead of square root, how much is square root of 2, roughly? 1.41. Right? Well, I'm going to prove that this is smaller than, right? It's smaller than something. I want to prove a loose bound, so this is big O as opposed to small o. But with some base, this is an exponential function, right? I'm going to prove a base that's slightly lower. So this says 1.41. I'm going to prove here, I don't know, 1.3. Okay? And the other side, I'm going to say it's a loose bound omega, but not of n cube, but something slightly higher. For example, n fourth. So what's the principle here? Why would I want to do this? Prove those loose bounds. Here's how it looks like. This is my T of n, goes up, right? These are the bounds that I'm proving here, which are loose, meaning I'm not saying it's strictly bigger than n4. It could be n4 or higher. Right? So this is the lower bound, right? Which could be, it's not a strict bound. The asymptote doesn't go, the ratio doesn't go to 0 or infinity. So this is what I'm proving, n4. And the other one that I'm proving here is 1.3 to the n. That's the upper bound. So these are tight bounds as opposed to those here that has to be strict bounds. The limits have to be either 0 or infinity. Those could be quite within constants. They're not, but for the purpose of the proof, let's say that. Why would this give me? How is n4 compared to the bound that I want to prove here? N cube is smaller than n4. And the ratio between n4 and n cube is a strict bound or a loose bound? It's a strict bound because the ratio goes to infinity or 0 the other way. How about what's the other bound? 1 square root of 2 to the n. How is square root of 2 to the n compared to 1.3 to the n? The ratio between those two is? Goes to infinity, right? Because if you take the ratio square root divided by 1.3, it's 1 point something. 1 point something at the power n goes to infinity, right? So if I prove these other loose bounds, I already have that square root of n is strictly bigger than 1.3 to the n, and that n4 is strictly bigger than n cubed. So if my T of n is in between those, then it's going to be strictly bigger than this, strictly smaller than that. And now this is just a general proof that most of you attempted in the paper. But it has to be done with different bounds than the original ones to be able to apply this sort of property. I can see why this is easier to prove, like I say induction proof, than the limits. But if I do it for n cubed and square root of 2 of n, it's not enough for this exercise. It turns out that this function here, T of n, it's actually bigger than all polynomials. So I could have chosen n to the 6th, 7, 20, 50, 100. Any n to a fixed power, it's a polynomial. And this is bigger than polynomials. And it's also smaller than all exponentials. So I can pick any a to the n here with a bigger than 1. That's going to be a bigger function than this. Okay? Problem number 2. Problem number 2. Actually, let's skip problem number 2. Let's do it at the end of the lecture today. Problem number 3, what was it?
Inversions.
Number of inversions, right? So what's the solution for that one? Merge sort, right? So if I do merge sort, I won't talk too much about it, that's an easy problem. How do I think of inversions? There is, I split in half, this is the m by 2, like in merge sort, right? This is m, and this is 1. I split my array in half, and then the inversions are of 3 kinds of inversions. Inversions on the left side, that is all the pairs ij where a of I, this is the left side. A of I is smaller than a of j, right? And bigger. I is smaller than j. So that's the inversions on the left side. Plus, there's inversions on the right side. Plus, inversions between, right? Inversions across. So if I follow the merge sort idea, I split in half, that's easy, that's a constant time operation, right? So then what do? I do inversions left is, this is my inversion count. Count inversions. I'm going to say count inversions on the left side, right? That's the recursive call. Inversions right is count inversions on the right side. Now, like in merge sort, should I expect this also to do the sorting of the array? So would I just count the inversions, or I also sort the array? I think I also sort the array. So then the trick, this is like in merge sort. So far it's pure merge sort, right? The trick is when I say invert across, it's a merging procedure, right? So I'm going to do merge and count in merge and inversion. So this is the part that needs to be modified between left and right. So in merge sort, this procedure does what? Simply takes the two halves, which are already sorted, and goes by arranging them. In here, I do want to do that, merge the two halves and put them in sorted order. But I also have to count inversions, right? So how is that going to go? If I have the two halves, and you know how it is, start from the beginning, right? Compare which one smaller goes in. So suppose I've already done this part up to here, and in this one I've already done this part up to here. And now in the merging procedure I'm on those two elements. I compare them. This is the left side, this is the right side. When I compare them, if the left side ends up being smaller, so I do the merging like in merge sort. I'm only describing here the additional step or the difference. I compare those two. If the left side is smaller, do I do anything extra to merge sort?
No.
Do I count any inversions?
No.
Okay? You sure? How about we look at it this way? This is the part that's already being done. I advanced this pointer so far, and I advanced this pointer so far. And now I'm here. And I'm saying this guy ends up winner. So this is the P, and this is the Q pointers, right? And I say I'm in the case of AP is smaller than AQ. So I promote this P, right, in my output array. Is this P have any inversions? Across. We don't care about the inversions left and right. That's going to be counted, but across.
Not at least with Q.
Not with Q,
But it can have more.
but with those, weren't those already processed? Why are they processed already? Because they're smaller than A of P. Right? Now be careful not to count inversions twice. Right? So whenever I look at an element on the right side, that is A of Q is promoted, what inversions do I need to count? Q is inverted with who? So it's on the right side. So who's inverted with?
And INF minus the part which is already processed.
This,
Yes.
the unprocessed. So either the inversions are either in the left unprocessed versus Q, right? That would be here.
Yeah.
Or I could count them as
Right process.
P versus
Right process.
Right.
right already processed. But that way, don't count them twice, right? You want to count them once. Right? So every time I do a merging, either in this case or in this case, I can add up few inversions for the across version. And that won't be a significant computation added to the merge sort. It's still n log n, because this is a one unit of computation. Who's following me? Okay, this is something that we may need to take home and think about it. Problem number 4. So the first part, it's easy, very easy. Remember the problem number 4? We want to split this set of numbers into the left side and the right side, such that the two sides are equal or as close as possible to equal, something like that. It's a famous problem called subset sum, and the solution is to apply knapsack to it. That's the obvious solution. So in problem 4, I design a knapsack that has capacity what? Sum of the AI by 2. It has the values equal with AI, and it has the weights equal with AI. And now I call the knapsack for Z, the values and the weights, right? So is it clear what I'm doing here? I have those numbers, like in problem 4, and I want to split them into a partition of two sides, such that each side is a half of the sum. So what I do, I design a knapsack problem. I say the capacity of knapsack is the sum by 2. The weights in a knapsack problem are those numbers, and the values are also those numbers. So now knapsack, I'm asking what? Fill those out of the objects you have. Try to fill a knapsack that's exactly half of the sum. So knapsack can come up with two answers. If it says yes, it means what? It found a subset of some objects such that the sum of those, this is X, the sum of these items, it's exactly sum by 2, right? So in that case, which is what happens to the elements that were not in the knapsack?
They form another.
Also sums would have by 2, right? So Y is the whole set, 1, 2, 3, up to N, indices minus X, right? So if the knapsack finds a bunch of objects that sum to half, the rest remaining not in the knapsack is the other half of objects that sum to the other half. Done. What if knapsack says, knapsack won't say no, but I'll interpret it as a no. How do I read this yes and no from the knapsack?
The sum of all the.
Is it managed to fill the knapsack or not? So yes is knapsack, Z is filled. Like there is not remaining any capacity, and no means Z is not filled. The best way to put items in a knapsack to maximize the value is there's no way to fit it exactly in Z, which is the sum by 2. In this case, there is no X and Y. If the knapsack couldn't fill the half of the sum with some of the objects somehow, it means there is no way to make a partition. Because if there will be a way, knapsack would have found it. The reason this is happening is because the values are the same like the weights. It's a very simple knapsack problem in here, right? If there would be a way to fill the knapsack, that would be the best way. That would be the maximum value. Because in this problem, when knapsack is done, the sum of the values of the objects in the knapsack is equal with the sum of the weights. So maximizing value is the same as maximizing weight. So when I say give me the best you can, the best will be to fill the knapsack. Because if you fill the knapsack, that's the maximum value obtainable. But it may not be possible. There may not be a subset of objects that fill half of the sum, right? You can easily see some numbers that sum up to 20, but there's no combination of them or subset that sums to 10, right? So if it comes to this fill knapsack, I say yes, and the objects in knapsack are one half, the objects remaining on the table are the other half. If it says no, I cannot fill the half of the sum knapsack, then it means there's no partition. Anybody did that in the midterm? 1, 2, 3, maybe? How about the other part? part B. So I won't want to solve this problem. I want to keep thinking about it for the purpose of dynamic problem. This is a complicated recursion. So what I want to do for now is to think of that C. What do I need in there, in that recursion? I don't want to put the recursion on the board, but I want to discuss the arguments in C. What's changing in there?
The number of elements chosen.
So I have to have some notion of the item set, right? This is items. That's like in the knapsack, right? In the knapsack, we did organize the items in a way that this item set is linear, it's not exponential. Remember, we have all the items up to 1, that is the first one, then 1 and 2, then 1 and 2 and 3, then 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, so that these i's are linear. You guys remember that? What else do I need to keep track of?
The sum.
The sum is purely a function of this item. So what else do I need in a knapsack? I need some sort of capacity of the knapsack, right? But I think I need some sort of another thing, which is difference to, this is a target. So what I'm suggesting here as a hint, I don't necessarily want to solve this problem fully, but I want the ones of you who are challenged by this kind of problems to think more about it. This is definitely in a PhD scope. So if you don't solve this problem and you don't solve problem 2, you can still get an A in this class. Okay? Those problems 2 and 4 marks with 2 stars are not going to hold your grade down. You can still get an A if you do everything else. But those problems are in the PhD world. So I think in here we need to say, can you, with those items, 1 to K, and a knapsack that big, can you achieve target on average? Can you achieve that sort of average? Or how close are you to achieve that average? Or what's the best way to get a bunch of items from this set that fit in this knapsack and have the average as close as possible to this particular delta? Okay? So this is best way to select items from set I such that the sum of the items is more, the item weights. In here, weights are the same as values. It's smaller than the knapsack, so they fit in, and the average of the items selected is as close as possible to this delta. Now, you guys can take this home and see if we can build a recursion out of it. Okay, problem 5. Did problem 5 have any stars? No? So what was problem 5? Number of ways to give change of n cents as denominations d1, d2, dk. In how many ways can I achieve that? Well, as an example in the problem that say, I have 30 cents, here's how many ways you can do it. Well, so that's, I think, reasonably easy, following the knapsack and coin. It's a combination of the knapsack problem and the coin problem. What is C of n? In the coin problem, remember what was the C of n? C of n was, in the coin problem, was what are the coins you're actually going to use, and the problem there was to use minimum number of coins. This is a different problem. It doesn't ask you to do the minimum. It asks you in how many different ways can you give change, right? So in that problem, I think the only parameter was n. We didn't need to keep track of these. We had an infinite number of coins of every kind. Same thing in here. We have an infinite number of coins of every kind. So in there, it was like, okay, if you want to give change to this, and you use and you use coin DI, right? Then how do you think about this? You use one coin plus the best way to give n minus DI, right? So that's before. That's the simple problem we did in class. Now, this C of n, it's not, this is the number of coins, right? In that problem, the objective was the minimum number of coins. So C is always the objective. In here, C is not the minimum number of coins. C is what? The number of ways to do change, right? So now, this is the number of ways for change. C will include n, of course. And it has to have a notion of the item set. That's the same like in knapsack, only using the coins 1 to I, or something like this. So I say this C is a sum of two things. The number of ways to give change to n cents. Think of it n as 100 cents, right? I can use that coin DI or not use that coin DIs. Is this a partition of the ways? And I'm counting anything twice?
No.
These are all the ways to use the quarter, and this is all the ways to not use the quarter. Am I counting anything twice?
No.
Am I counting everything at least once? Yes. Right. So if I use the coin DI, how many ways are there? Well, I have to use the coin DI, and then I'm left with n minus DI, and I can still use all the coins. Right? So that's all the ways to say, use that coin DI, and then see how many ways can you do the rest. But if I don't use the coin DI, how many ways I have? I still have n, I minus 1, right? I say already don't use the coin DI, so you can't use it later. That's it. Just fill up this table and we're done. Good. Not too hard, this midterms, right? It took what, 28 minutes so far? Right? It's not that bad. How about problem 6? Greedy or dynamic programming? Greedy, right? So here's the trick in problem 6. It's not really hard. I put the star because it's given everything we did, you can get confused about what to use, but the problem is not really a star problem. You can easily, that's clearly a master level problem. This is not. But this is clearly a master level problem. It's what you want to do is to say, I have an activity, that is my if you want, my first activity. The first activity, I'm going to sort them by starting time. Say, this is my global finishing time, which says the supervisor that supervises this must cover the G. In other words, any supervisor activity, this is my current supervisor. Current supervisor. This supervisor must cover this G. If this supervisor is outside this G, it doesn't supervise this activity. Okay? Remember what supervisor means? It has to overlap, even a little bit. So the point is, the current supervisor start and finish time has to have S smaller than G. So I'm going to sort by start time, right? Start them in order. So because I sort by start time, all the starts are going to be in increasing order. I don't have to worry about going back in time because they start in this way. So what I'm going to have is this G that needs to be covered. This is an activity, that's my first activity, and to supervise it, every next activity will start after, so I don't worry about something in the past. But this starting time has to be as small, at least G, right? The moment I have a new activity that's after it, that activity, like in here, this cannot supervise this one because S, it's over G. Right? So now that I have this situation, I'm looking at the next activity in the starting order. What can happen? There's a bunch of cases, right? This is my current supervisor. So case 1. I get an activity that is completely included in my supervisor. So this activity has, so this is the S of the supervisor, right? This activity has S bigger than S the supervisor and F smaller than F the supervisor. What do? Move on. This is already supervised by this activity. Right? Case 2. I have an activity that has, the start time has to be smaller than G, and the F time is bigger than my current supervisor. Right? It goes further to the right. What should I do in here? What?
Make it the supervisor.
Change the supervisor from this one to this one. This is a better supervisor because it still supervises the first activity. It overlaps with it, but it's better to the right. It can overlap with more activity than my, I may have an activity here that is better to go further to the right if you can. In fact, that's the strategy. What you want is to, once you have this G, you want to select the activity that still starts before G, but goes as far right as possible. But if you think about this way, that may be an n log n problem. Because for each activity, how do you select which one goes further? Right? In this way, make this one the current supervisor. So then this one won't be a supervisor anymore. And the supervisor, the current supervisor, in my notion here, is the one that supervises all the activity from the beginning. So the current supervisor, because it covers this first G, right? What happens if I get an activity that finished before G? So how would that look? So case 3. So this S is bigger than SD. And this G, this F is smaller than the global G. So can this activity be totally, so what's happening here? I have a smaller G to cover, right? So this means, first of all, I have to update what? I have to update G, right? My global G that needs to be covered is not here anymore. It went a little left. Can I run into trouble with the current supervisor?
Yeah.
Is it possible that the current supervisor somehow was too far to the right already, and this one, so what would be the situation? I've already have a supervisor that starts in here, that just catches this G a little bit, but my next activity is too far to the left, is not supervised. Is this possible?
Yeah.
You sure?
No.
Why not? Why is this not possible?
They've sorted it in the starting line.
It's sorted by starting time. If this would be possible, this S would have come up before
Right.
this supervisor.
Right.
If it's, I'm sorting them by starting time. So for this to be possible, for this to be completely on the left side of the supervisors, it means the start time, because the start time is better than the supervisor, this situation is not possible. So in this will mean this activity must be included in the supervisor, right? So think about it, its starting time is better than the start and supervisor time, but the finishing time is smaller than G, which is smaller than the supervisor finishing time. So this activity is just like in this case, includes the supervisor, but I have to update the G. The global covering finishing time, it's a little shorter now. Who's with me? That's the creative part, that this case, why this case works. Yes.
So you're actually choosing the supervisor and then going on the further items to make sure whether that's an.
So as I
That's a
keep
problem.
going in starting order, I sometimes I call this a supervisor, but later on I may call the next one a supervisor. But it's only one supervisor so far.
That's fine, but that shows that it's not greedy, right? Because when you say greedy, if you already choose the item, then you don't change it.
Right, but I don't declare it a supervisor until at some point in time, this current supervisor.
Yeah, so that indirectly means that you're actually searching for the remaining items.
Yes, but I'm only searching for each activity. I'm only making a constant amount of time based on that activity. And the greedy notion, I can agree with the philosophical debate of greedy, but the essential part is, once I'm done with this item, I don't have to go back processing it. Right? So the way I think about greedy, again, I'm not keen on the names. If you, from a philosophical point of view, say, okay, this is not greedy, I want to call it something else, I'm perfectly fine with that. But in my mind, greedy is I process each item with a constant amount of effort, like few operations, and I never go back. I have this notion of what's a supervisor, which I'm not going to be ready to declare it until I print it out. That's a supervisor. The point is, as I process the array of activities in that order, it's actually a linear traverse. For each activity, I do a constant amount of operations, and I never go back to check something with the previous activities. So my actual effort here is going to be linear. The only problem to why this algorithm is not linear is why? The initial sorting is n log n. But other than that, this is linear time algorithm. So I can agree about this classification of greedy. Did I change my mind? It's still greedy because it's always changing my mind in one direction, right? If I declare the next activity a supervisor, it's a better supervisor than the other one. So it's an increasing order of quality of supervisors, if you want. So I think this is an absolute critical point. Why is this activity covered by my supervisor? This is not a possible situation. It has to be within SV here, because it's sorted by starting time. And if G is smaller, I need to update G. This is a critical step. It's the difference between this case and this case. They both cover completely by the supervisor, the current supervisor. The supervisors remain what it is. The difference here is that the global G that needs to be covered got shorter. And what's another case? When the current activity that I'm reading is outside, oh no, there's another case. It starts out within the supervisor. So this starts is bigger than the G, but is smaller than the supervisor start, right? This is my current supervisor here. And it has an F that is large. Then here, when I start before G, I can call this one a supervisor, right? Why? Because it covers G. Can I call this one a supervisor?
No.
No, because it doesn't cover G. But I can keep my current supervisor, right? Because this supervisor overlaps with this one. So this is already covered. So move on.
Is that FP?
Yeah, FB and SV are the current supervisor SNF. Yes.
What if there's a activity which starts after the first one, but ends before SV? It is sorted by the start time, right?
You mean here?
Yeah.
Yeah. This case is not possible. I would have got that first.
So, yeah, you got that first, right? But then you can't choose the other supervisor which overlaps the first one and
This
ends
one.
ends the latest.
But this won't be a supervisor.
Okay, the
Because
global-
by this time, G gets updated. And when I move here, this doesn't cover the G, so it's not a supervisor.
What if we sort by finish time, take the first one,
The problem is symmetric. Everything we can do from left to right, we can do from right to left.
but then we won't have to update G or something. We just have
You
to
have
take
to
one.
update S in that case.
I don't think so.
When I get to grade the exams, you guys gonna have the chance to come to office hours, and some exams have a big explain, I didn't understand what you mean, so you can come explain to me the solution. But I think you need to update, if you start from the left, you have to update the left side. Let me move on here. What's the last case? When I have an activity completely outside. That is, S is bigger than FV. Right? So it's after the current supervisor time. What do I do then? I print the current supervisor, say that's the current supervisor, and I erase all these activities that already done, and this is my first activity now. I'm just starting from the beginning with this activity. Because the current supervisor supervises all the activities so far, I print that one out, and I don't have to worry about those activities. So I remove them completely, and I say, I'm starting from the beginning with this one as a new activity. This is start from beginning. So print, you need to print the supervisor, the current supervisor, and start from beginning. Because what's the situation here? My current supervisor, again, the way I think about it, supervises all the activities so far. The moment I get one that's not supervised by that supervisor, and it cannot be itself a supervisor because it doesn't overlap with this G, then it means I'm done. The supervisor, that's the moment when I call it a supervisor, okay? That's the moment I declare, this is my supervisor. And then from now on, I'm just starting from the beginning. This is my new activity to start with.
In the fourth case, how can the S be greater than G and less than SV? Isn't SV already less than G?
No, sorry. S is bigger than,
Less than
Less than
FV.
FV.
So, if there is a case that activity starts right after the G and it goes till the end of the time, we are going to not.
if that's already supervised by your current supervisor, you can move on. You can keep the current supervisor and move on. If that's, so this is the case where it's still supervised by the current supervisor. The supervisor finish time is bigger than start time, so they do overlap. And this goes all the way up in time, right?
Yeah, so can't there be a case that this could have been the only activity which we might have required for all the other ones, but we just, you know.
So there is a question here, what he's asking, I think that's an important point. Suppose I pass this one and I say, that's already supervised by my current supervisor, right? So this F is very long. And then I move on, and at some point I say, okay, now I'm cutting this S out here. I'm gonna start this problem, I'm gonna come up with solution supervisors. What if this activity was a better supervisor than all the ones I could have found here? Yeah,
That's
what do I do
not
then?
possible, right?
That's not possible.
Why not? How about we think about that? I don't wanna think about it now, but maybe we need to keep track of something else here. So again, the problem in here is that this activity here might be extremely long and might be a good supervisor for everything after. Now, it's not a good supervisor for my current one. But the moment I ignore it, I say, don't account for it, because it's already supervised. It may force me to pick 4 or 5 more supervisors after that. Instead, I could have choose this one to supervise everything. So I need to keep track of something here, this F, to make it work. Okay? That's something you can think about.
Make that as a supervisor.
Hmm?
Make that as a supervisor and that.
Right, the one that I need to consider as the first activity, maybe is this one, not that one. Somehow, I need to say, when I'm in this case, this is the activity that's the first one in my new batch. But how do I keep track of that?
What if you sort by maximum duration, decreasing order of the maximum duration?
F minus S.
Yeah.
And then pick the one that's maximum?
No, then pick all the ones which are being covered by the maximum. Keep checking it.
I don't think that's optimal.
No, you come to case 4, and if it is case 4, then if F is, always check if F is bigger than the current FV, then make that as a supervisor.
But that is not covering the G.
This is not necessary to be a supervisor because I already have a supervisor that covers both this one and G. But what this is necessary to be is my first activity in my new batch. So I need to make it a candidate for the first activity here. And when I move on, this is not my first activity, this one's my first activity. But how do I do that?
You could keep the total variable whichever that f is longer.
Yeah, but then is that still a linear time? How many times I have to go back and redo the thing? This is a great solution. You may need to think a little bit more about it. So I showed you here kind of what the situation is, but this is not a complete solution, right? So in here, there's another update on this F. But how would that work? So we need to move on. We're going to talk more about those at office hours. I'm not going to talk about it in class again. But for the ones of you who want to keep thinking about it, we should do that. And eventually we should get to some solution here. So we didn't do problem 2. I'm going to move on with the next chapter. And then maybe at the end of the lecture, or maybe Monday, we'll do problem 2. So you guys have a bunch of homeworks that were due Monday or so. Did you do them? Did you implement all that? Right? Red, black trees, when they're supposed to finish it? Well, when was it due? Well, I think it's already due, so you should start doing the demos to the TAs. Right? Those programming exercises, you have to show the code and you have to show how they run, okay? So both hash and red black trees. The other homework involves a summary and some simple exercises. That's just regular homework you submit normally on Dropbox. But the coding exercises, which also happen in the next homework also has a programming exercise. It's called Fibonacci heaps. Those you have to show to the TAs, okay? So the TAs will change their office hours for the next 2 weeks into more presence at an office hours, because the grading on those programming exercises, they don't look at your code at home. They see your code at live at the office hours, then it works okay. They just put the grade in directly. Okay? So they'll be more present Monday, Wednesday, Fridays, maybe even Thursdays, so you guys can do these demos. And by today, you should have the code done. So if you didn't do the red black trees yet, you have up till like 12 at night to do it today. Okay, we need to move on to the next. So this is one of the few things that are definitely probably not seen as an undergraduate student. So I would imagine that you have not seen red black trees, for example, as an undergraduate student. But everything else, including dynamic programming, most of you have seen already. This is the second time when you see it. So I think binary search trees and hashes and stacks and quicksort, most of you have seen already. But regular trees, you did not. And this, you probably did not. How many people have seen amortized analysis? All right, 9. So we're not changing the algorithms. Amortized analysis does not have nothing to do with changing the algorithm. What it does, it changes the way we measure the runtime of the algorithm. Okay? So this is more theoretical than practical because again, it doesn't have to do with having new algorithms, hashing or binary search or trees or whatever we want to do. That stays the same in terms of pseudocode. What changes is how we measure the runtime. So here's an example. Suppose I have a binary counter. That uses from 1 to n, uses log n bits. Like if I want to count from 1 to max, I need log max bits, right? So here are the bits. And initially my counter is 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. That corresponds to n equals 0. And then the operation here is add 1. That's all this counter does, it adds 1. So the next, if I add 1, what's going to happen? I get the 1 here, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. That's n equal 1. Well, when I add another 1, I also want to compute the number of changes. I mean, how many bits I have to change. If I imagine a very rudimentary computer, of course computers don't work that way. But for my example here, I'm going to imagine that every bit change costs me $1. So 1 bit change is $1. $1. So of course, I know that computers don't change the bits literally in constant time operation. They change a lot of bits at once. But my silly computer here, this is like the first based on lamps computer. When you want to change the bit, that's a constant operation. So how many changes I have here? 1 change. In here, what's n equal to? How does it look? 1, 0. How many bits do I have to change? 2. I have to change those 2 bits, right? How about the next one? N equal 3. 1. This is now 1, 0, 0, 0, right? How about the next one? 1, 0, 0. That's n equal 4. How many changes are here? 1. How many changes are here? 3. How about the next one? 1, 0, 1. N equal 5. How many changes? 1. How about the next one? 1. 1, 0. That's n equal 6. And how many changes are there? 2 changes, right? So now suppose I want to count from 0 to n. My question is how many bit changes. That's the same as saying how much dollars, if I have to pay $1 for every bit change. Yeah? So here's a gross running time, or naive. That's what we did before today. We say there are n operations times how many bits at most each operation can change. If I think of every one of these operations, how many bits it can change?
And
Log
Okay.
n bits. I have log n bits, and it's possible that an operation changes all of them, right? So at most, log n changes, at most bits change. That's equal with? That's how when you look at the for loop, people think about. This for loop has n iterations. Maximum in each iteration could be log n. So that's at most n times log n. Well, so I say that's gross approximation because in practice it's not n log n. Why is that? So this is the inside. If an operation has many dollars, bit changes, many previous or next operations have few dollars. The point is, while it is possible that some operation has log n or a lot of bits, one such operation means a lot of other operations must have small changes. It's not possible to have a lot of operations, all changes log n bits or half of the bits. You can see that very easily. Once a big operation changes a lot of bits, like this 3 in here, the next operation will change 1 bit. The next operation will change 2 bits. In fact, in this simple example, we can do an overall count of bit changes. This we can do here because the problem is trivial. This cannot be done on regular problems. So we know exactly how many operations will be the first addition. 1. How about the next one? 2. How about the next one? 1. How about the next one?
3,
How about the next one?
1, 2, 4, 1 to 1, 1 and 4, 4, 2, 1, 3, 1, 4, 3, plus 1, 4.
Can you guys add up this thing? How much is it? How do I think of adding up those numbers? I think it's pretty clear what's happening, right? Once I move, I move the main one, then this sequence will be repeated, everything I've done so far, right? Once this is 1, 0, 0, what's going to happen, those 2 bits is exactly what happened before with them, from 0, 0. So, how much is this? How about we think about differently? What is this ones corresponding for? What is a 1? When I have a 1, which bit changes? Every time the bits change, they change from the right side. So if I change 3 bits, which bits are those?
Right.
The last 3. So every time there is a 1, it corresponds to which bit being changed?
Right.
Every time there is a 2, it corresponds to
Second,
the 2 bits. The last bit, it's always changed, correct? So how many times the last bit changes?
Log n.
I want to write this sum differently. Right, this changes is how many times?
N.
N times. This last bit changes all the time. That corresponds to 1, a 1 in here, a 1 in here, a 1 in here, 1 in this 2, 1 in this 4. Every one of these numbers, one unit of that is the last bit that must change all the time. How about the second last
n by 2
bit changes? How many times that changes?
n by 2.
N by 2. Where are those changes? One is in here, one is in here, one is in here, in here, right? Every time this is more than 1, there is a 1 for the second bit. How about the third and last bit
More than 2.
changes? Where is that? It's in this 3, right? Every time it's at least 3,
Yeah.
I'm changing the third bit. Where else is that?
n by 4.
In this 4.
Sorry.
Again in this 3. So how often that bit changes?
n by 4.
About the fourth last bit. How many times that changes? N by 8. So the sum is, in fact, n plus n by 2 plus n by 4 plus n by 8 plus n by 16 plus n by what?
2 power k minus 1.
What is this sum? This is n times 1 plus 1/2 plus 1/4 plus, this is geometric. How much is this thing? This is 2.
2, yes, 2n.
Right? If you add up all these repeated halving, you get 2. Do we know that about geometric series?
Yes.
So this is
2n.
2n. That is linear. What's my point here? If I count this operation right, it didn't change the algorithm at all. The algorithm does exactly what it did. Instead of counting grossly n operations times log n each, I'm counting much more carefully. I'm saying, wait a minute, how many times each bit actually changes? And I don't get n log n, I get 2n that way. Okay? Does it make the point? So we want to change for some problems the analysis. We still have the same algorithm, but we're going to measure runtime differently. Like this trivial example here, instead of n log n, we get 2n. So that is linear. So there's a bunch of names for these methods. So let's call this a counting method. I'm more general with this name than the book. Everything that involves this kind of bookkeeping, I'm going to call accounting. It's not possible to do this unless the problem has a very simple structure like this, right? Like when we really can account for bits or for some individual parts of the data structures, so to speak. So here's what we want to do in general in amortized analysis. We want to have a sequence of operations. So the algorithm is a sequence of operations. Like in this case, adding 1 several times to my binary count. The CI is the true cost of operation I. And the CI cost, I put a hat, is the amortized cost of operation. Right. This is also the cost in analysis. So instead of using the true costs, we use these fake costs. Now, in here, we didn't use fake costs. This is like if you want exact accounting. This is in here, this version is exact counting. In here, we didn't need these fake costs. We just directly counted the big changes, right? We didn't need any sort of version of amortized cost or upper cost or nothing like that. We just count mathematically how many bit changes are in there. Great. That's only possible on trivial examples. When you get to Fibonacci heaps, there'll be no way to do that. So I'm making this a little bit more, I'm still going to count it accounting, but I'm going to say, okay, you are consuming gas when you cook, right? Every day, every month. And the gas bill comes every month exactly with how much gas you consumed. The gas consumption will be the CI. Right? Same thing with your mortgage or your taxes or your electricity bill or something, right? However, sometimes the gas company offers you a way to say, pay a fixed amount every month, right? The phones companies were like that, right? Your typical phone bill is very constant, even though your usage fluctuates a lot. And more usage is going to cost the company more money. How come they charge you a fixed rate? Same thing with the loan and mortgages, right? I pay my loan and my mortgage and my taxes and insurance. It's all in one package to my bank account, right? They charge me, including the escrow and hazard and whatever else, a fixed amount over the year. What they do, they charge me an amortized cost. That's what they do. Right? So the notion of amortization, conceptually speaking, is like, here is the cost, this is time, and this is cost. The actual cost is something like this. This is C. The amortized cost is something much more soft. This is the amortized cost. So if you think of the word amortize, refers exactly to this notion of amortization, or reduce the variation or the bumps that you see, right? So now, of course, we want to have some mathematical properties for it, but you can think the best analogy is this one with the gas bill. Even though the gas consumption can vary a lot from month to month, you can talk to your gas company to give you an amortized cost that is pretty much the same cost, or very close, but instead of paying very wild different amounts every month, you pay more like a constant. Maybe it's easier to do your money, income, and taxes and everything that way, instead of having a cost that's sometimes $1,000 and sometimes it's $3. Better to know, okay, every month on average I'm going to pay $400 in the gas bill. So what we want here is an amortized cost that's close enough to the CI in the following sense. We want CI is to be enough to cover CI cumulatively after K operations. Any K. So in other words, the first of the K operations of CI, so that's the first K operations, has to be smaller than so we want to design an amortized cost such that even though there's large fluctuations in the gas bills, for the first 4 months, I already paid the first 4 months, so I'm never owed the gas company money. right? That's what it's saying. The first month, I pay more maybe, or at least as much as the gas bill is. The second month, I don't necessarily pay more, but I pay enough such that what I pay the 2 months is enough to cover the bill for 2 months. This is the true bill in a gas sense, and this is the what I paid. What I paid so far. In many ways, if you have a loan for a house, the escrow accounts work like that. The escrow account is designed to always have enough in it to cover your expenses. And they always charge you a little bit more and adjust it every year or every 2 years to say, if I charge you too much money, I'm going to charge you less from now on. The escrow account is what I pay the bank or the gas company. This is the actual expenses, taxes, fixtures, interest rates, whatever it is, right? So that's how you have to think about it. I've always paid enough to cover my expenses, but this is a much more flat cost than the true cost. So what would be an amortized cost here? This is the true cost. This is the C's, right? The C's for the first operation is 1 bit. For the second operation, 2 bits. Third operation, 1 bit again. Then it's 3, so on and so forth. What would be the amortized cost? That is CI, and this is amortized. CI hat. 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. To think about any way you add those things, not just all the way down. All the way down, we did it in here. All the way down, we sum up, it's how much? 2n? How much is this going to be? 2n, fine. But even if you add the first 3 versus the first 3, these amortized costs are always enough to cover my true costs. Right? 1 versus 2. This is 3 versus 4. How about 1 to 1? This is 6. 1 to 1, 3. How much is it? 7 versus 8. Right? It always close there. Of course, I want those to keep those down. Okay, I want the sum to be as close as possible to the sum. I don't want to pay too much gas bills in advance, right? But I want to make sure I never owe money to the gas company, so at every month I pay at least as much as I owe. Now, this is a simple example where the amortized costs are constant. The amortized costs are not always constant, but they're much more flat than the true costs. Which sometimes are hard to compute. Sometimes we can't even tell exactly how many operations something's going to take if I have a complicated data structure. So, how about in a stack? You guys just recap stacks, right? That homework, previous homework, stacks. So if I think of a stack here, stack, what are the operations?
Push pop.
I can put push of value. I can do pop of k. K is like outputs k or k values or all in the stack if less than k. Right? Pop k means take k items out. If you don't have k, you take all of them that you have out. Right? So what is the cost for push? The true cost? 1, right? What's the true cost of k? K. If I think naively, like in the binary count, if I tell you my stack has n operations on it, what's the maximum an operation can do? The size of the stack. So if I'm naive, like in here, I'm going to say you have n operations. Each of them can say the stack is up to size max. Right? naive runtime for n operations is what? If each operation was the maximum running time in a stack, max, right? It may be that the stack is full and I'm depleting the whole stack. That's the biggest operation I can do. And on operations could be at most and max, right? Of course, like in a binary count, it's not possible to have operations that are that big. Once you depleted a lot of the stack, you can't have another operation immediately after that that depletes again the stack, right? For an operation that big to happen, a lot of pushes have to happen, right? Because I can't deplete a stack until I push it up. Who's with me? Hands up so I can see them. Okay? So what would be an amortized cost for every operation? How can I think of an amortized cost that sometimes covers push and pop in the same time? Two. That corresponds to push plus pop for that item. That item is some value here, right? If a value is pushed, it's going to take me 1 to push it. And later on, how many times can be popped before it's pushed again? 1 time. Could be an operation that pops it once, or twice, or 3 elements, doesn't matter. This element could be popped once. So then when I push it in, I have an amortized cost of 2 for pops. And then for push. Right? So push, let me say here, this is the hat. So what is this? This is 1 for push, Ci equal 1, and 1 for later pop. So every time I push an element, I call it 2. That's the push, and I save $1 later on for the pop. So then what's the amortized cost for pop?
1.
Didn't I already saved the pop money? Do I need anything else for the pop? Because every element has already $1 saved for the eventual pop. So in that sense, is it true now that the sum of, for any number of operations, the CI, it's going to be at least what I need to pay? It's going to be true because that's going to save enough money for the eventual pops. So the runtime of this is going to be 2n. Independent of the stack size. See, this runtime does not include this max in it. No matter how big the stack is, if you have 100 operations on a stack, the actual cost is 200, even if the stack is 3 million big. And you can have a pop there that extracts the whole stack. The point is to have a pop of size 3 million, I must have first push into the stack 3 million objects. Right? So it's a much better runtime than the naive one that says if your stack is really big and you do 3 operations, you may have 3 million runtime. This one says, no, if you have 3 operations, your cost is at most 6. Okay. How about that midterm problem? Problem 2. Now it's a little bit of cheating because we didn't do amortized analysis before the midterm, right? So in amortized, in that problem, what was it? For every, I don't remember the example. For every element, we look at the previous height, right? The most recent, but at least that height. So if here I have I don't know 7, right? This is the first one, 7. There. The next one, suppose the next one is 5. Then this 7 works, right?
Yes.
I could say, I'm going to put a pointer that says, at this value, this is your answer. What happens if now I have here a 1? This is the previous one, right? What happens if I now have here 6? So it's the next element. 6.
7.
This needs to go to the recent high, which is the 7, right? So imagine I have these arrows already built, right? So here's the next one. This is a 3. This 3 is going to go to the previous one, right? Maybe I have another 1 here. It's going to go to here. And then what happens if I have another 6 or another 7? This one's going to go the previous 7, right? So how do I compute this arch? I'd say it's naive. So in order for me to figure out if I have the previous arches, so somehow I keep track of this guy, the most recent element, at least that high, this is in position 7. So the pointer is from 7 to element 1, right? If I have these arches, what's going to happen to the next value here? How do you go by the next value? Where is the arrow going to go?
Backward.
What I'm going to do is check the previous element. And if the previous element is big, so say I have this value here. If the previous element is bigger, I just put the arrow right there. Fine. Suppose it's smaller. Doesn't work. So I check this stuff and say, no, it's no good. It's too small. Where should I go look next?
It's a recent.
Where this arrow points, right? Because if this is no good, and this points, say, to here, every value in between, what happens to it? Why is this one, previous one, pointing to here? Because all the values in between are smaller than this. And if this one's smaller than my current one, ain't no point trying them. Because I already know this is smaller, this is this level, everything here is below that level. Nothing would work. Is it guaranteed that this one will work?
No.
No. But it's possible. So instead of this is try 1, then if this one doesn't work, I go here, right? This is try 2. And now suppose my current value is actually bigger than that. I get a no here. Where should I try next? Where this one is pointing, right? Because again, everything below it, if this one is pointing here, everything in here is too small. So I go further this arch, right? So what happens from current element, I start on the previous values, and I follow those arches up to where? When I found the value, at least that high. The reason when I'm going to stop here, maybe, here I get a yes, because this value is at least as big as the current one. So if I see this, I put an arch here. Right? Simple algorithm, right? I mean, how hard is this? I think this can be implemented in like 7th grade easily. If somebody tells you this algorithm, I think it's pretty easy. And I said that during the midterm, right? What's the difficulty in here? Why is it linear? Because in principle, you don't know how many arches you need to jump around, right? And obviously this is linear in n, you have to do it for every n. To show that it's linear overall, you need to show that clearly some of them, by the way, clearly some of them will have a lot of arches to go back. That is when?
sorted.
No, no, no. What kind of element will have to go back a lot?
Which is a
A big one. A big one will say, try the previous one, doesn't work. Okay, try the previous one, doesn't work. Okay, try the previous one, doesn't work. Because this one's so big, the current one, I'll have to go back a lot. Fine. So I can't say it's a constant number of arches that need to be checked, because it's not constant. Obviously, for some big ones, I have to go back a lot. But still, the sum of the arches, if this one checks so many arches, the next one checks so many arches, this sum of the arches is overall linear. That's like in here. See this? Sometimes it's a lot of bits that need to be changed. Fine. Sometimes it's log n bits, but overall it's still a linear sum. Why? What's the amortized cost for every unit here? 2. One is to deal with it, and I save one for what? That's the last thing I'm going to say about this problem, because I want you to go home and solve it, okay? I'll be really happy if you come back at office hours with an answer. Why do I save a unit? For what kind of phenomena or operation?
Whoever who's in the future points to me? Yeah.
Points, but not to me. I save
the pointer.
one unit for when those arches will jump to, will jump over me.
Yeah.
I need to save $1 for every time a jump from this jumped to here. Because that will have to be checked. I need $1 saved here to save for the operation that jumps over me. That's the part you have to go home and think about it. But suppose I do that. Suppose I save enough to jump over. How many times do I jump over one element? The moment I decided, okay, this guy is not this, is not this, is this, is that. So I have to save, the first time when I jump over these elements, I have to save the money to say, from here to here I jump over, say, 4 values, right? I had $1 saved for each one of them. You guys follow me? I have $1 saved. From here to here, I use that dollar to jump over. My point is, I'm never going to need to jump over these elements ever again. I only need $1 because I may need to jump them once, but I don't need more dollars. Because once this jumps to here, every further element is going to either be okay with the current, or if the current is too small, where is he going to jump? Is he going to check all these ones again? No, he's going to follow the arch directly here. So I don't need the money to jump over those because this arch already jumped. My point is, saving $1 in each one of them, it's enough, because wherever they are not the right element that I'm looking for, I'm jumping over and I save the arches. And I only need to do that once. Every element will be jumped once, so I only need to save $1. Now that's a lot easier with amortized analysis than without. If we don't have this saving amortized cost notion, you can still solve it, of course. I could have presented all this idea without calling amortized analysis, right? These gas bills, phone bills. What makes it hard is that while this is perfectly doable without ever mentioning amortized analysis, just sum up these things, right? Just say, how many times I'm going to pass over one thing. You count it, it's only once, so I need 1 unit of runtime to deal with forward and 1 unit to deal backwards. It makes it much harder if you haven't seen this idea before the midterm. That's why it had 2 stars. Okay. So these kind of problems are the problems that recruiters ask to test your thinking. In most interviews today, you're going to get 2 types of problems. Thinking problems could be things like puzzles. 4 people jump over a bridge with a flashlight. What happens? Okay? There's 2 bulbs in 3 rooms, and you can only enter the doors that many times. How do you close all the lights? Things that do not require certain techniques. Like this. You can solve this problem in the 7th grade with no algorithmic technique at all. much harder than if you know amortized analysis, of course. But then you're gonna get this kind of question, 3 lists intersect in 1 point, find out the minimum list. That you can do without knowing anything about algorithms, but it requires a lot of creativity. The other type of questions are software build-up that involve some sort of Java or Python programming and some notion of objects, data structure, function calls, how to build certain things. For that, it's pure engineering. You're gonna have to know that. If they ask you a question about, MapReduce in Java and you never heard of it, you're better off saying, I never heard of it, because you're not gonna be able to come up with an answer. In these kind of problems, even if you don't know amortized analysis, you can still solve the problem, okay? The testing of your thinking will have to do with how your mind works. So don't be discouraged if the problem seems hard, because sometimes the answer could be figured out, much more time, of course, with basic notions. But be aware that a lot of interviews are of 2 kinds of questions. What you must absolutely know, like if you never heard of hashes and you have hash questions, how collisions work, you have no hope of figuring out on the spot how collisions work. You have to know that about hashes. But these kind of thinking problems, you need a lot of practice with puzzles and stuff like that to be able to come up with an answer during the interview. And most recruiters will guide you. Once you have some idea, they will point out, okay, why is that good or bad? So don't get stuck and then say, sorry, I have nothing to say. Try something out, because the recruiter will help you. Okay, the real amortized analysis technique, which we have not done, is neither one of these. When we actually do amortized analysis for real, we use something called the potential method. Potential method is defining the difference between Ci hat and Ci as a function of the data structure we have. So we missed the lecture. We're gonna have to continue amortized analysis on Tuesday. And I'm gonna make the homework available now, because there'll be some questions there that you can do without this, but most of them you can, so you'll have to wait until next week to start the homework. But this current homework, you have to have it done like immediately, okay? And then demo will go to the
Right.